Kedu. So today is Transparency Tuesdays, and I wanted to talk about the conditioning and socializing that happens within the world, within the community, within the black community, within the male species, the female, I think that can be a series, and I think that it's something that needs to be talked about because it's something that's very alive and well. But I'll just talk about the feelings and the emotions part because that's what I was talking about with someone last night. I asked a very subjective question. I said, do guys desire to be married? And that question is subjective because it's subjective to that person. But it was a general question. And I like points of views and different perspectives. So I like to ask general questions to get a point of view from certain people. So this person, of course, said it's subjective. And I said, well, why don't guys ever talk about it? You hear women talking about how they want to get married one day, and you never really hear that from men. Is that something that men really look forward to? Or, what? And again, it's subjective. And he went on to say that expressing feelings and things like that was taboo, or is taboo maybe, and how growing up guys are conditioned and socialized to not express themselves. And I was like, that's so true. Now, I know that also men not expressing themselves can be a little bit deeper than just how they're raised. It can do with self-esteem issues. It could deal with their relationships with the women in their life, their mother, their grandmothers, their sisters, experiences in the past. Like, I know all those things come into factor, but I want to talk about the socialization and the conditioning that happens to our young men at a young age. I can recall last year someone was talking to my son about girls, asking him if he had girlfriends and he needed to get the girls. And I know that's a thing that guys like to do with the little boys, but it has to stop. And when I overheard that conversation, I had to end it because I'm not raising my son to be a womanizer or a man that's going to have attachment issues later on, or a man that's just seeking and hunting and chasing. No, that whole idea and thought process needs to be left behind. And mothers and people with kids and aunties and uncles, when we see things like that happen, we have to nip it in the bud. I mean, unless you want to raise like a womanizing man or whatever, but that's not my objective as a parent. So when I hear certain things, I have to stop it. Like, no, we're not going to do that. Okay? So I can see how that has come into play and with the way that some men operate and the way that some men are. It's because of that conditioning that happened when they were young. The conditioning that the media tries to put on us. You see it in the movies and the music and the music videos and the TV shows. The guy has to have this certain swagger about himself. He has to have the money. He has to have the cars. And that attracts the girls. But he don't want the girl because he wants all the other girls. And it's like there's always some form of conditioning that's being happening. And it's like so crazy when you sit down and think about it. But yeah. And then another thing, I was like, well, of course the attachment issues, we talked about that. And then they're expressing themselves. Men never really express themselves. And it's because at a young age, they're told, like, what are you crying for? You're a man. Man up. Stop crying. And I will say that in the past, I've told my son, stop crying. Why are you crying? But it wasn't because you're a man, don't cry. I just didn't want to hear it. You're not a baby. Stop crying. But I had to stop that. I now tell him that if you're mad, you can cry. If you're sad, you can cry. I don't want to raise him to be angry because a lot of these young boys that have anger issues growing up, not all, but some, it's because they weren't able to thoroughly express themselves as a child. They didn't know how to express themselves because they weren't able to. So they just do whatever, and they ended up punching walls and beating on people and things like that. So I think that at a young age, we have to break that whole you can't cry barrier. Like, no, it's okay to cry. It's okay to calm down, get yourself together, and then come back. Like, we have to teach our young people, men and women, better coping skills. And we can't allow the ways of the world to condition them to think a certain way, or to act a certain way, or to be a certain way. And it's so detrimental to a person's growth when they can't express themselves, or when they can't be themselves. Imagine not being able to express yourself. I couldn't imagine that at all. So, yeah, that was just an interesting conversation that I had, and I just want to share it with you all. What other issues with conditioning and socializing do you see on a regular basis? This is just one of many for me, and I just wanted to come on and share it, being that I'm a parent, and I don't want to raise a kid that's emotionally unavailable or can't express himself, because of that's how generations and generations of men have been raised, to not express themselves, because that's weak, that's soft, that's not what men do. But it is what men do. There's beauty in a vulnerable person, but there is beauty in a vulnerable man. A man that is comfortable with himself, that can express who he is, that can share who he is, and not really be bothered by what other people have to say. And there's beauty in a woman that can be vulnerable enough and say, hey, this is how I feel, or hey, this is who I am, and I'm not going to hide it because of what society says I need to be conditioned to be. So, yeah, I just wanted to share that with you all. Again, what ways do you see socialization and conditioning in your life, or in the lives of your children, or just in the world, period? What other areas are we being attacked and being taught how we should feel and react and things like that? So yeah, if you love someone, tell them I love you all. Bye.